Patrick Reed is now in a position where a return to the PGA Tour is possible. That part is factual. The more interesting question is what the reaction to that return tells us, especially from someone like Rory McIlroy, because he's one of the biggest names in the sport and has spent years as one of the clearest public voices defending the PGA Tour. When Rory talks about LIV players returning, he sounds a lot more open than he used to. But when Patrick Reed's name comes up, something changes, the tone drops, the warmth disappears. And if you listen closely, it feels like Rory is telling you something without ever fully saying it. So why does Rory still seem deeply uncomfortable with the idea of Reed coming back? Once you look at the history between them, that reaction starts to make a lot of sense. And it really starts with one small moment that said a lot. At Pebble Beach in February 2026, Rory was asked about LIV guys coming back. And what stood out wasn't just what he said, it was how differently he said it depending on the player. When Brooks Koepka came up, Rory called his return a big deal. He spoke about him like a real star coming back into the mix. But when Patrick Reed came up, the energy changed completely. Rory basically said Reed had played well enough to earn his way back, and good for him, polite, measured, but noticeably less enthusiastic. Watch it for yourself here.
So yeah, I think I think Brooks coming back, one of the best players of our generation, 5-time major champion, that's a big deal. Patrick earning his way back through really good play over on the DP World Tour, that's great for him. And
golfers do this all the time. They rarely tell you everything directly. They say the acceptable thing publicly, and then the truth leaks out through the tone, through who they praise, through who they sound careful around, through who they talk about like they're fulfilling an obligation. And Rory's reaction to Reed felt exactly like that. What makes it even more revealing is that Rory has softened a lot on LIV in general. This is not the Rory from 2022 when he was one of the loudest anti-LIV voices in the sport. Back then, he was openly critical of players leaving, openly frustrated by the damage LIV was doing, and openly willing to call out what he saw as hypocrisy. At one point, he even described some players' behavior around the split as duplicitous. That's how sharp his stance used to be. But over time, that edge eased up. By early 2026, Rory was saying something very different. He said he'd be open to welcoming LIV players back to the PGA Tour. He even acknowledged that many of them had already paid a price in terms of reputation and what they had lost by leaving. That's a major shift. It tells you Rory is no longer interested in fighting the same war forever. He seems more interested in golf, moving on. And that is exactly why Patrick Reed stands out. Because if Rory is now willing to move on from LIV players in general, but still sounds cold when Reed's name comes up, then clearly his issue is no longer just LIV. That's too simple. With Patrick Reed, something else is going on. And that something else is history. This stopped being a normal golf disagreement a long time ago. It stopped being about tours and politics and who went where for what money. With Rory and Reed, it got personal. The clearest example was Dubai in 2023. Before the Hero Dubai Desert Classic, Reed walked over to Rory on the range and tried to greet him. Rory ignored him. Reed then flicked one of his LIV tees in Rory's direction as he walked away, and later said Rory was acting like an immature little child. On its own, that already felt petty and awkward.
Patrick Reed has labelled Rory McIlroy an immature little child after he refused to shake the American's hand at this week's DP World Tour event in Dubai.
But Rory's explanation is what turned the whole thing into something much bigger. Rory said he had been served a subpoena at his home on Christmas Eve by a lawyer involved in LIV-related cases and someone who had also represented Reed before. So from Rory's point of view, he felt like Reed's side had already pulled him into the legal chaos of the LIV era. Then Reed showed up a few weeks later acting like nothing had happened. That helps explain why Rory responded the way he did, including saying Reed was not living in reality. That one moment changed the feel of the rivalry. And that matters when you're trying to understand Rory's reaction now. And the thing is, Reed's reputation was already complicated long before Dubai. In 2019, Reed was given a 2-shot penalty at the Hero World Challenge after improving his lie in a sandy waste area. It became a huge story because the footage was everywhere. Fans were angry. Other players noticed. The incident fed into something that had already followed Reed for years. The idea that, with him, even routine situations quickly become trust issues. Then, in 2021, at the Farmers Insurance Open, he was at the center of another rules controversy over an embedded ball situation. The tour later said he followed the correct process, so this is not a case where you can simply say he cheated. The bigger point is that with Patrick Reed, these controversies keep happening. I've only named a couple out of quite a few incidents, and that kind of reputation has a way of sticking. Then there's the team stuff. After the US lost the 2018 Ryder Cup in Paris, Reed publicly blamed captain Jim Furyk and said Jordan Spieth did not want to play with him. That turned a team loss into a public feud. Colin Montgomerie then said Europe's success was built on a moral code and made clear he was surprised Reed had taken those complaints public. In other words, this was not just drama. It raised real questions about Reed as a team fit. And when you stack all of that together, you start to see the bigger picture. Patrick Reed doesn't just return as a golfer, he returns as baggage. The second his name comes up, the conversation stops being just about golf. And that may be exactly what Rory does not want. Here's the thing. I don't think Rory is threatened by Patrick Reed in the normal competitive sense. This is not about talent. This is not Rory saying Reed isn't good enough, because Reed clearly has the resume to matter. He's won big events. He's been a major champion. He's been relevant for years. That's not the issue. The issue is what his return represents. Look at the contrast with Brooks Koepka. Brooks returning can be framed as golf getting a star back. It feels clean. It feels simple. It feels like one more step toward reunification. But Patrick Reed returning doesn't feel like that. The second his name comes up, you're no longer just talking about golf. You're talking about lawsuits, personal grudges, rules, controversies, Ryder Cup drama, and one of the most polarizing reputations of the last decade. That's a completely different kind of comeback story. And if Rory has spent the last few years trying to help golf move past its ugliest split, then Reed may feel like the one player who pulls the whole conversation backward. That's probably the real answer here. Not that Rory is campaigning behind the scenes to stop Patrick Reed. Not that he would ever say, flat out, keep this guy out. But the evidence does suggest something subtler and, honestly, more interesting. Rory is willing to forgive the rebels, but he isn't ready to welcome back the chaos. He might be open to LIV players returning in principle, but in practice, Patrick Reed is the one bridge he isn't ready to rebuild.